Hi, this is Randall, and welcome back. We are getting ready to start session 3. I hope you've enjoyed the intro sessions 1 and 2, and the little slight detour we took on the purchasing manager or supply chain manager survey. And for this one, session 3, we're going to get into airlines and relatedly hotels, casinos, and resorts. You'll see there's some slight nuances in what we're going to talk about in this one, but you'll see that there's a lot to consider when you start approaching these together. So with that, let's get started. As you know, I always just do a quick rewind. When we talk about the supply chain, we're talking about the supply side of the business, which is where you as the supplier are involved, and the demand side. So you have to look at this on both sides. What does it cost to bring it in, and what does it cost for the client or the customer to use it? For services, the supply side is a lot simpler, and in this case we're going to be talking about services. The demand side, it's reasonably similar, with the exception of you don't have disposal on the demand side in this case. And we're going to talk about airlines. And in the Global 500, they didn't actually have a category for casinos, hotels, and resorts. So that's not on this list. It's a subset. It was buried a little far. And some of the companies didn't quite make the Global 500. But I thought it important to talk about these two industries anyway, because we hear so much about them in the news. So as you'll recall, we always talk about the value chain. These are the things that are going on to support the primary activities. So your business may have more of an impact here, or it could have just as much of an impact here. In both cases, each segment drives profit margin for the company or loss. And when we talk about the airlines that are on the Global 500, here's who we're talking about: American Airlines, Delta, Lufthansa, United Airlines, Air France, International Airlines Group out of Britain, which presumably is British Airways and whatever else is in that conglomerate, and the Emirates, which has come up at number 476. 258 billion in revenue, 14 billion in profits, 309 billion in assets, over 630,000 employees globally. That's a pretty decent market. And hotels, casinos, and resorts, interestingly enough, it's only a $91 billion industry with 7 billion in profits, 175 billion in assets. Most of this is in real estate, as you might imagine. This can be a little deceptive. We'll talk about that in a second. But equal amount of employees, over 691,000 employees. And we're talking about Marriott, the Las Vegas Sands, MGM, Hilton, Caesars, Wynn, the folks you would expect to be there, sure enough. And so what are we seeing in terms of the current trends with the airlines? Obviously, the airlines, and they went through this after 9/11/2001. People, for a whole host of reasons, weren't getting on planes. After 9/11, people were scared to get on planes because they didn't know if airplanes were going to be used as weapons. I'm not quite sure if that was more of a global issue, but I mean there was a lot of concern around whether or not, if planes couldn't be protected in America, what were the security and safety strategies in the global market for commercial air travel. And so in the current situation we see in 2020, there's more of an issue around not so much as the plane safe. A number of people have overcome that issue over the last 19 years. It's been more of, am I at a health risk to get on the plane? And then with human nature, what has to happen before people get comfortable that they're no longer at a health risk? And in this case, not only are they in a health risk to themselves, but can they potentially contract something on an airplane or the entire trip experience that they may take home to their family? So this takes on even greater concern with regard to what airlines have to do to convince people that it's not only safe to get on the plane, it's safe to have the airport experience, it's safe to have the rental car experience, it's safe to have the hotel experience, it's safe to have a whole host of different experiences. So the in the short term, what we can expect with that revenue loss is airlines for easily the next 3 4 years will try and figure out what other services can they provide using the plane, their primary asset, as the vehicle to move material from one location to another, because they are very efficient at moving people back and forth, as well luggage and other kinds of things. So a number of them will probably look at cargo, post office, other kinds of things that they may be able to get into temporarily, and they may see that as some ongoing part of their business. Delta Dash was big for a while. Most of these folks have had cargo operations, but they, however, have had some limitations because of the restrictions on what you can actually put on an airplane. They hadn't been able to put liquids on and a whole host of other things. So trying to work your way through what makes sense, what can you cost effectively put on an airplane, when is it cheaper for you to use an airplane versus a ship versus rail versus other options that people have available to them, and at what price. We clearly are going to see a huge amount of demand for worker productivity. In this case, when you look at that whole ecosystem, you have the ecosystem of the airline itself, and we don't really have a slide that talks about the airport, but we've seen over the years where people in the airplane are expected to do more and more. Flight attendants will oftentimes service the cabin, and we're seeing that they are not paying folks for standby time in the airport and whatnot. So they're trying to cut the hours back and only pay them between when the doors close and the doors open on the airplane. And they're trying to get to scenarios where, they try not to sit out on the tarmac for so long. So, but you can expect that they're going to try and ask the labor unions, and they're going to ask workers to do more and more and more. We may see longer term some increase in automation and robots, but we're going to see that they're going to try and get more out of employees, especially in the short term, because they clearly are confronted with staff reductions. As you can see, we've got highlighted right here the potential for staff reductions. A number of them have announced, after the government subsidies run out, a number of them have announced that they are potentially looking at massive layoffs or massive reductions in force to the tunes of 20 or 30,000 people. And I think the other thing we can expect, that they're going to have increased load factors if they can figure out how to do it, but fewer flights. So they're having to rationalize some of their routes and a whole host of things. Now, in the short term, what does all this mean to you as a small business owner? If indeed these trends hold, then this means that this could be a tough market for you to compete in. However, if you have a product or service that helps them to reduce the impact to their profitability of any of these short-term trends, they're looking for you. They're saying, look, come in, save us, show us some ways to do these things that help us to offset some of the loss that we're anticipating. Because this is an industry that's going to go through some pain. They will be agile, they will be nimble, they will be able to come out of this on the other side. But if you can help them to by offsetting some value destruction, then you have a huge opportunity, a growth opportunity in this market. It's actually kind of ground floor. If you can get in now, then by the time they get on the other side, there's a good chance you're going to be with them for a while, because you understand how they operate and you were there when they went through the tough times. Longer term, we're thinking the best I've seen so far is that, and oh, by the way, as I'm talking about these trends, I need you to map this with your knowledge and your research and your domain expertise about this industry, and compare and contrast. If you have even more in-depth, then you can kind of take some of the bullets we have here and expand it further and see what it is your company can do to participate. Or you can see if you can go out and see if you can find some nuances in this information, where as you look at the global market and you may say for a particular region in Europe or in Australia or in South America or in other places, in South Africa, there may be some opportunities, because you're not seeing the same short-term trends that we're observing here, just based on the carriers that you're observing, not necessarily the the Global 500, you may have carriers that are, as in the case of Qatar, no, Emirates, that may be government owned, but they have a different revenue model and they have a different service model with government subsidies. So there may be some things that they are exempt from. Long term with airlines, the airlines industry is still expecting that by 2024 they hope to have gotten their footing back. They will continue to have demand for zero carbon footprint operating models. So that's going to be most everything they do, from ground equipment to the planes themselves, as well as the various things that they bring on the airplane. So you can kind of expect that's going to continue. So if you have a product, a green offering, you may actually have, once again, a ground floor opportunity, because with not as many planes in the air, they have some opportunities to take advantage of this time period. Continued need for robots and automation. So that, I think, is not going to be radical or wholesale. I think that's going to be incremental. But if there are technologies, if there is equipment or whatnot, one of the things they're looking at are these robots that can go up and down the aisle to shine UV light on the entire cabin as a means of remediating for COVID-19 and pretty much a whole host of viruses, very similar to UV lights that you see used in hospitals or nail salons or barbershops or those kinds of places. They've got a machine that can go up and down the aisle and do that for them. So that things like that are always going to be in demand and in need to help them to lower the cost of the cleaning crews and everything else that are going on. Not so much the cleaning crews. The crews still have to come in and remove the paper and do other kinds of things. But, well, partially, that's a mixed bag there, depending on what they have the flight attendants doing. But nonetheless, you can see how this could make a world of difference in terms of the quality of service that they offer to the flyers, as well, maintaining the cleanliness and hygiene of the planes themselves. There is, in certain countries, a continued competitive threat of high-speed rail. Some people just may not want to get on airplanes anymore. Once you stop doing it, you don't know that you're necessarily inclined to be a road warrior, especially if you find that you can have a reasonable relationship with your counterparts. So in this case, the opportunity could be that you'll get on an airplane, but perhaps as a road warrior, you may not be on the airplane every week. In which case, high-speed rail or just video conferencing continues to be a threat for the industry. And then one of the curious things, especially with the virus, is a potential reduction in demand due to population shifts. If we see an out-migration from major urban areas and people move back to their hometowns, then the flights going home to see mom and dad, and the flights to going to see the grandchildren, and the flights to this, that, and the other, and whatnot. I don't anticipate this going to be a huge issue, but I do think with the concentration of major urban areas, there could be quite a bit of issue, quite a bit of maybe 5 or 7 or 3% issue from this, especially as we see in the U.S. with a lot of people actually leaving a lot of the big cities and going back home, where it just is a lot more economical. Hotels and casinos. All right, short-term issues there, similar to the airlines. For your small business, extended payment terms, if they had you a net 45 just to conserve cash, a lot of them may move you out to net 60. They may move you out to net 90. Some may try and move you out to net 120. 120 days. Supply-based rationalization, obviously, to the extent that they can consolidate their suppliers and leverage their spend and create more savings, they're going to do that. Same with labor force optimization, continued cost pressure. In this case, they may have non-performing markets, so we could see that some of them begin to sell assets or shut down assets in a certain area. Now, this one is going to be fascinating. The hotel business is not necessarily directly correlated to the airline industry, because you have a number of different between some of the smaller business property type hotels, the boutique hotels and niche hotels, like in the U.S. we have like Hampton Inns or Marriott Courtyards, not your full service hotels. They are popping up in industrial areas, and they're servicing major employers in an industrial area. So some of those may come back sooner. It just depends on were they put there for convention business or were they put there for some other type of operation that has not been impacted. So when you look at hotels specifically, we'll talk about casinos and resorts separately. When you look at hotels specifically, you'll have to look at the geography and see if you can assess what it was they were put there for. Were they put there for travelers, for commuters, for like truckers, or vacationers that are driving RVs or any recreational vehicles or caravans or anything like that, and then you can kind of say, how do you handicap what they're going to do, what they're going to need. In the cases of casinos and hotels to some degree, not as much as casinos and resorts. Interestingly enough, a lot of them have been protected because of their ability to generate tax revenue. In the U.S., what we call sin taxes. That's gambling, alcohol, liquor, so forth and so on. So a number of those businesses were able to operate, and a number of those businesses were able to continue to thrive because of the tax revenue that they generated. So I don't know that I necessarily see that as a growth industry. There might be some growth in demand for some of those, but not necessarily a growth industry. But a lot of them are still operating at 50% of capacity because you still can't have more than 10 or 20 people together if you don't have a system or process in place for social distancing. And then, of course, I think we're going to have some, throughout the remainder of this year, continued depression of convention and large group events, which, of course, creates a whole host of issues with regard to their available revenue. So what I would say as an impact to your small business for this group of industries, hotel, casinos, and resorts, I think they're going to continue to be in a cost containment mode. They will continue to be under stress. And if, once again, you have a product or a service that can help them increase the productivity of their labor force, help them to potentially find another use for underutilized assets for hotel rooms or something that's not disruptive to their business model, if there's anything that you can do that whether it's virtual or otherwise, that allows them to either offset costs, whether it's reduction in electricity costs or other operating costs, because their fixed costs are reasonably their fixed costs are probably not changing that much. It's their variable costs that they need help with. Then that's going to be your opportunity there in the short term. In the longer term, once again, they may rebound in advance or earlier than the airlines. And in their case, this will be the second time that they've gone through this kind of thing. So they probably will be more inclined to have somewhat of an agile business model. Something that you might consider, I'm just throwing this out here, is if you were able to provide a service, say like a housekeeping service, where you actually could go to a geography and help them with their housekeeping staff, where you can move folks around, because if they're operating at 10, 20, 50% capacity and they try to get housekeeping done between 9 a.m. in the morning and 2 p.m. in the afternoon, then depending on how many properties you have in that territory, you might be able, with a small labor force, be able to go in and service a number of different companies. The fact that they're competitors is irrelevant, and if they don't have to maintain the people costs, because they're only calling people in for 2 or 3 hours worth of work, it may be more worth their while for you to do something like that. So if you take that model, something like that, and then you expand it for other kinds of things that you might be able to do for them, where you can provide that service for them, then as they staff back up, then these are things that could potentially definitely be of interest to them. And the model you want to think about here is whether you provide it or whether you get them to pool resources into it. It doesn't really matter which way you go. But if you recall, if you've been to a large airport where a lot of the automobile, the rental car companies have consolidated all their individual locations into one super location, and they just have a storefront in each, a kiosk or storefront in this main facility. So what they've been able to do is have one place each company pays in for just their fractional share of that facility, as opposed to maintaining their own separate independent entity. And so if you take that idea and you look at it with hotels, casinos, and resorts, especially if you, probably more so with hotels, maybe less so with casinos and resorts, when you start looking at your ability to do that for them, that could be something that's worthwhile if you're looking to help them out, both in the short term and long term. And of course, to the extent that there's automation, robotics, or technology to help them offset labor costs, the fixed costs they can't get around. Some of them may try and do a sale leaseback on their real estate, which potentially could help them, but that's a separate issue. And then, of course, they will have to deal with the increased operating costs that are driven by nutrition, increased needs in hygiene as a result of germs and bacteria and virus that COVID-19 has highlighted, as well as environmental or green or climate concerns. So that for the long term for them, I think you can expect to see as a trend. So if your small business helps to position them for this, or if you can offset some of the costs here, then I think you will be in good shape to figure out where the money's flowing and put your business where it's flowing so that you can capture it. So again, I always give you this framework for further analysis. If you recall, I mentioned this was a services sector, so we don't really deal with raw materials. There really isn't a manufacturer per se in the context of their supply chain the way we're discussing it. They have customers, not consumer in the context that we talked about in others. Shipping is not so much of an issue, and products and orders aren't that much of an issue. So specifically in this case, this is a much simpler supply chain. You probably have a number of suppliers, people from whom they purchase airline parts, people from whom they purchase materials and towels. They have a number of different supply, fuel, electricity, gasoline, a whole host of things. But they have suppliers that are providing to them. They may or may not go through a distributor. Clearly, most all of them have some type of central warehousing that where they resupply or restock from. Retailer in this case is the airline, the hotel, the casino, or the resort. They provide services directly to the customer, and they use e-commerce to kind of work through this experience. As well, they have e-commerce that works through this back end here for their supply chain. But that's kind of a simple way to think through. If you're going to plug in, how might you be a supplier, distributor, a warehouser? What can you do within their property itself to help lower their costs or increase their profitability? And is there a role that you have in the customer interface with their brand, whether it's something via e-commerce or the order system or whatever it is you can do that might create an opportunity for your business? Now, if you recall, in one of our slides, we talked about all of these falling in one of three industries: manufacturing industry, process industry, or services industry. These three are all in the services industry, which means that they are people intensive as opposed to manufacturing, which is capital intensive. These are all people intensive. Although hotels have a lot of real estate, their primary cost is cost that drives their profitability are their people costs. All right. And interestingly enough, with the airlines, you would think that with a lot of them, that the airplanes makes them capital intensive, but they're not a manufacturer. A lot of them lease their airplanes. So once again, it's the people cost. As I mentioned, when you start talking about laying off potentially 20 or 30 or 40,000 people, it's pretty obvious what's driving your costs. And if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you already know that, for small business owners, people drive costs. The more people they bring in, the better it is for us. When they start letting people go, we really have to show off our ability to innovate and solve problems for them, and helping them to understand how to run a good business with less people, like we do day in, day out. And of course, I put this one up here just to from the previous area in the deck to highlight exactly that with a people-oriented business, you have the back office function, but then you have the operation. So when you look at the hotel staff, the casino staff, the people that are on the floor, the people in the airplane or at the airports, that's operations. That's the primary activities. So as you think through what your small business is doing, where can you impact this area or this area for these four industries? So that's all I have for you on this one. I hope as you are analyzing all of these various verticals that this gives you some idea of whether or not this is a good place for you to focus. If you can get going with one of the companies in these four areas, there's a good chance with their herd mentality that you'll be able to leverage that success to the next one and to the next one and to the next one, and then you get a decent market share, and then you hop to the next vertical. That's the way we recommend you go about that. So this is Randall signing off for now, and letting you know thank you, and we will have session number 4 coming up in the next few days. Take care. Bye for now.